Tonight on KQED Newsroom, an update on the current rise in COVID-19 cases. Dr. Bob Wachter joins us and talks about his own close call with the virus. Plus, in the category of the rich keep getting richer, J. David McSwane shares his investigation into pandemic profiteering, which minted hundreds of new billionaires. And what's in the multi-million-dollar package to bolster reproductive health services that Governor Newsom just announced? We'll look at the week's big political and budget news. And can you guess where we're headed for something beautiful? It's a place where people can turn trash into treasure. Coming to you from KQED headquarters in San Francisco this Friday, May 13th, 2022. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer in for Priya David Clemens. It's been a while since we've started the show with a discussion of COVID-19, but the pandemic has never been far from any of our minds. COVID infections are flaring up again. New case rates in May are about double that of early April. Here in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have some of the highest levels of infections in the state, according to the New York Times. But the death rate from COVID is low and continues to decline. Joining us now is Dr. Bob Wachter, Chair of the Department of Medicine at UCSF. Dr. Wachter, you've become one of several go-to experts in the Bay Area. You've helped guide us through this pandemic with advice on masking and social distancing. You've been very cautious, and yet your wife recently contracted COVID. What's all that been like for you?
Yeah, she got it speaking at a science writers workshop, and she was fairly careful, although they did eat meals indoors and came back and had it. It's been hard watching her. She's, this idea that it's, quote, like a cold is wrong. She was quite ill for several days. We feel quite grateful that it happened now and not a year or two ago. She's been vaccinated and boosted and took Paxlovid, and she's doing better now. She's 5 days out. And I have continued to test negative despite the fact that we were hung out together for a day or two while she was already infected. So that just demonstrates the power of the vaccination and the boosting and the fact that I'm also a little bit lucky.
Well, we're glad for both of you. Can you describe this current rise that we're seeing? What stands out for you?
How big it is and how many people who have dodged the bullet for 2 years have gotten it. I'm sure you're the same. I know more people now than I can think of at any time who have not gotten COVID for 2 years who have gotten it. And it's a combination of this variant or subvariant is wildly infectious, and people are being less careful. I think we're also a little bit lulled by the number of cases. They look like they're going up, but not massively so. But it's an underestimate, probably a threefold underestimate of the true number of cases. My wife tested positive on a rapid test that we did in the house, and so the city and county of San Francisco does not know that she has COVID because it doesn't get reported anywhere. And there are a lot of cases that are like that right now.
When you look at hospitalizations, when we look at deaths, how many of those people are unvaccinated?
Well, in a place like the Bay Area, a fair number of them are vaccinated because 80 to 85% of the people in the Bay Area are vaccinated. So we are seeing more people who are hospitalized who are vaccinated because they're more vaccinated people. The people who end up dying, though, are almost invariably either unvaccinated or, in our case, we see some people who have multiple medical comorbidities. They're very ill or they're immunosuppressed. It's still very clear that if you're vaccinated and boosted, you are massively protected against a severe outcome. And I think one of the more striking things about this surge is despite the number of cases at UCSF, we have about 15 COVID patients in the hospital now. In the height of the Omicron surge in January, we had 150. So about 1/10 as many hospitalized patients. So there is definitely a disconnect between the number of cases and the number of severe cases. If you're vaccinated, you're boosted. And also, if you get sick and you're eligible, you begin antiviral medicine. The chances you're going to get sick enough to go to the hospital and the chances you're going to die are nearly zero.
Some of the nation's leading experts are signaling caution in group settings. Dr. Fauci said that he skipped the White House Correspondents' Dinner because he didn't want to get sick. Dr. Walensky from the CDC shared photos of herself being masked indoors. And here in the Bay Area, some health officers are again talking about getting together outside. And if you're indoors, masking once again. What is your advice?
I'm with them. I think that there's a lot of COVID around. If you go into an indoor setting with 20 or 30 other people, it's almost a certainty that one of them has COVID with the amount of COVID that's around. If you get on a plane with 150 people, it's 100% sure that someone on that plane has COVID. So if you have decided that you don't care about getting COVID at this point, that you're, quote, over it, that's a decision. I don't think it's a good decision. I think it's best avoided if you can. And so I will have a few close friends and family over for dinner if I know they're vaccinated, I know they're boosted. But in terms of indoor dining, in terms of large groups indoors, if I'm going to be indoors with a lot of people, I am wearing an N95.
We're coming up to the summer. There are going to be gatherings of graduations, summer travel. What is your prediction for the trajectory of COVID cases over the next month or so?
It's hard to know because we're used to these surges that go up fast and come down fast. But the reason they come down fast is partly because there's more immunity, more people get infected, and therefore they're not vulnerable in the short term. And also that when there's a surge, people say, oh my God, there's a surge, and they start being much more careful. They cut down on their indoor activities, they put on masks. In the old days, we used to see mandates in response to surges. We're not seeing that now. So my guess is this surge will last longer than prior surges. And I think this is our future for the next several years. We're going to have surges, they're going to come down. We're going to have surges, they're going to come down. And I think we could have one over the summer. I think we're certainly going to have a substantial one in next fall and winter.
All right, Dr. Bob Wachter, thank you so much and stay well.
Thank you. You as well.
There's a number we're hearing frequently this week, 1 million. America is hitting the 1 million mark for COVID deaths since the pandemic began, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Now here's another number, 500. Now that's not a particularly big number, except that's how many people became billionaires during the pandemic, according to our next guest. J. David McSwane, author of Pandemic, Inc., Chasing the Capitalists and Thieves Who Got Rich While We Got Sick. David joins us now. And let me begin by asking you about the title of that book. It includes the phrase capitalists and thieves. Obviously, those are not the same thing. Is it fair to say that some of this money was made legitimately?
Oh, sure. I mean, one chapter in the book, I focus on the development of vaccines. That's a product that is extremely valuable that the U.S. government invested really heavily in, but a few people who were at the right time in the right time at the right place made many hundreds of millions of dollars. So I don't lump them in with profiteers, who really saw an opportunity to take advantage and lie and cheat and steal.
Well, give us an example of the latter. Some of the biggest scams that you found.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there was just this frenzy in the early months of the pandemic because the federal government was so ill prepared. We had something like 1% of what we needed in the strategic national stockpile in terms of masks and gloves and gowns and things like that. So we just saw people coming out of the woodwork, forming an LLC, getting a multi-million-dollar contract from the federal government by the end of the week, and many of those contractors didn't deliver, or they delivered subpar goods, or just charged extreme prices for those desperately needed life-saving equipment.
And how much of that was just poor vetting, by the people that were purchasing it, government usually?
I found that there was virtually no vetting within the federal government. One major contractor I focus on in the book got his $34.5 million deal with the Veterans Administration, which oversees the largest hospital network in the country, which was really besieged. He got it just by saying, hey, I have 6 million masks, and somebody within the VA said, the guy seems legit, and that's how he got his contract. There was really no oversight.
Some of this, of course, was during the Trump administration, and I'm wondering, is most of the book during that period of time, or does it also go into the past, year or so of the Biden administration?
Yeah, the book sort of ends in fall 2021, so we do make our way into the Biden administration, but just by virtue of those really scary months and just the outflow of tens of billions of dollars in various programs, including just purchasing things, most of the action happens within the Trump administration, which woefully failed to address the moment.
California was not immune from this, and I know that you focused on at least one company out in California, in Southern California, VPL Medical. Tell us about them.
Yeah, so this is a company that I saw here from Washington D.C. just in the data, got a big deal with the Health and Human Services, which oversees the national stockpile, and FEMA, and looked into the company and realized it had just formed, gotten these major contracts, and the proprietors behind that company had a history of fraud allegations. And in fact, there was a shadow owner involved, a guy named Jason Cardiff, who has been sued by the Federal Trade Commission for a variety of alleged scams perpetrated out of California. He's living a lavish lifestyle while selling things like bogus sex enhancement pills. So I started to look into that and met up with a plucky juicer salesman. He sold high-end juice equipment. We met out near Venice Beach and ended up going to this facility and found that this company had essentially been given seed money by the federal government to bring in Chinese masks and upcharge them, and taxpayers ended up paying a premium.
Was this the same company where California was about to pay, I think it was $100 million for 500 million masks or something like that, and they had to claw the money back? Was that a different case?
That's a different case. I think you're referring to BYD, where Governor Gavin Newsom, essentially seeing that the federal government wasn't doing its part, tried to strike its own deal and received a lot of criticism, but in concept, maybe wasn't the worst idea. States were really left to their own devices.
Well, that's a good point, right? Because if that had been more of a coordinated effort on the part of the Trump administration, maybe states like California and the other 49 wouldn't have been scrambling without the kind of vetting that was required.
Yeah, it really was. It was a cascading failure, starting with the federal government's failure to listen to its own experts. And you have cities and states and hospitals all competing for the same supplies, and you have these poor government purchasing people who they're used to buying chairs and paper clips and desks. Now they're in charge of life-saving equipment. So a lot of money went out the door. A lot of bad deals were struck, and I certainly have some empathy for those folks. It was a really tragic situation.
Does the book suggest that we need to change something, or is this, as you suggest, I think, early in the book, just unfettered capitalism? This is the system we have.
There are certainly things we can change. I mean, I knew just as a reporter instinctively after the CARES Act was passed and we knew billions of dollars were going to go out the door that there was going to be some fraud. But I was really struck at the breadth and the brazenness of this fraud. People really thought they could get away with screwing over the federal government and taxpayers. And historically, you don't see that. Usually, fraud's perpetuated by consumer to consumer, business to business, things like that. So it really was astounding. And basically, this book is a blueprint of exactly what not to do. We were so ill prepared. We didn't have anything, things that we needed, and that really left us vulnerable to these mercenaries who took taxpayers for a ride. And hopefully we don't do that the next time around.
Well, and tell us about these 500 billionaires. These were newly minted that did not exist before the pandemic. Any one or two or three jump out at you?
Yeah, the book really focuses on individual cases of people trying to profiteer and ending up in these absurd scenarios that I detail in the book. That figure, 500 billionaires, really comes from Forbes magazine, which is sort of looking at the broader pandemic economy, which we all know really COVID highlighted our inequities throughout our system. And it was really the poor and vulnerable who suffered most, and those who had the capital to withstand it and move money around in smart ways made a fortune.
Were there any consequences, or might there be, for some of those thieves that you allude to in the title?
Yeah, so my reporting journey really set off in April 2020. I ended up contacting a contractor with the VA who had that $34.5 million deal, and end up on a private jet a few hours later, and come to find that he didn't have the masks. There was this underworld of brokers and investors that he was working with, and detailed that sort of first story, and it propelled me on about a year and a half of reporting. And in that time, that contractor, Robert Stewart Jr., as a result of that reporting, was charged with 3 federal crimes, and he's in prison. Many others got away with it and got paid in other programs like the Paycheck Protection Program. The federal government prosecutors are going to be catching up to widespread fraud in those programs for many years.
And I guess you could say, just in closing, that this was done with the best of intentions on the part of governments. I mean, not only was there no federal coordination, but people were dying. I mean, if you need to get ventilators, you need to get ventilators.
Right. I mean, money needed to be spent. These programs were necessary, but because we had so failed to prepare and heed the warnings of experts and the Trump administration's decision to downplay the pandemic, by the time we caught up, it was just ripe for the picking, and it was a bonanza for fraudsters. So we knew we were going to spend money. It was an emergency, but we really got in our own way, and greed really frustrated the pandemic response at every turn.
Well, hopefully there will be some lessons learned and consequences for those who you write about in the book. J. David McSwane, investigative reporter and author of Pandemic, Inc. Thank you so much for your work and for sharing your insights with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Earlier today, Governor Gavin Newsom unveiled a revised budget for the state of California, which affects everything from the minimum wage to relief for high gas prices. It also includes a huge surplus.
Simply without precedent, no other state in American history has ever experienced a surplus as large as this. In fact, this is actually significantly larger than last year's operating surplus.
Joining me next are KQED politics and government reporter Guy Marzorati and Los Angeles Times political writer Seema Mehta. Welcome to both of you. Guy, let me start with you. These budget rollouts are always marathon events. The governor likes to talk. $306 billion overall spending plan. What stood out for you?
Well, yeah, Newsom's always in a sweet spot when he gets to just go down the list of these spending proposals. I think you have to start with the top line surplus number, $97 billion. That's an incredible amount of money. It speaks to the tax revenue that we're getting from high income earners in the state. But I have to say, Scott, I thought it was kind of overshadowed today by the fact that Newsom has still not reached an agreement with legislative Democratic leaders to provide inflation relief to Californians who are still experiencing incredible rises in prices. The governor basically today resolute, he's sticking with his plan that he wants to do it through the DMV sending out debit cards to people based on their car ownership. The legislature wants to take a broader approach, saying inflation is not just about gas prices. They want to target this more broadly, but really focus on low-income Californians. We kind of circled this date of the May revise, Friday the 13th, is when we might see an agreement reached on this, but it hasn't happened yet. And you have to imagine whenever a deal is reached, it's many more months after that to when Californians can actually get relief.
Why do you think he's digging in on this? Why does he want to die on this hill?
I think the argument that he's made is how quickly the relief can get through the DMV compared to the franchise tax board, which is how California has distributed relief in the past. It's the way the legislature wants to do it. But Newsom made the point today that his Golden State stimulus went through FTB last year, and those checks are still trickling out. So I think he views the DMV as a better way to do that, to get those debit cards out. But the legislature, I think, has the maybe moral argument that they're really targeting this relief and not letting more high-income earners who own fancy cars get a slice of this relief.
Also some money in the budget, about $125 million, decimal dust, really, compared to the overall budget for women's reproductive health.
That's right. It was definitely not a top-line number in terms of how much it cost, but it was something Newsom really wanted to articulate and tout at his press conference today. Money that would include, $57 million more dollars for things like grants to reproductive health care, allowing folks who don't have the health care to get that care. And so it's definitely something, and a contrast Newsom wants to draw with, red state governors.
Yeah, let's listen to a little bit of what he had to say about that.
Health, understandably, has expanded even deeper in one's consciousness as it relates to what's happened what happened years ago at the Supreme Court, but what's now manifesting as a consequence of what happened over the last few years with the politicalization, from my humble perspective, ever since Mitch McConnell delayed that nomination and ultimately just exposed the harsh realities of hyper-partisan politics and tipped that third appointee in Donald Trump's hands, the court, and this is what we get.
Seema Mehta, what does it tell you that Governor Newsom and other Democrats are making a big deal out of this? And we should say this is all in the context of that leaked draft opinion that would strike down Roe v. Wade.
Exactly. I think Democrats overall, there was some concern that some voters are pretty unhappy because of inflation and homelessness and crime, and this has been Republicans would argue that they're trying to divert attention from the state's many problems. But that said, I mean, Californians are very, very in favor of women having access to abortions, and this has allowed Newsom to talk about an issue that obviously he's passionate about, the Democrats are passionate about, and he's also sort of got some national attention for this. He's up for re-election this year. He has a lot of money in the bank. He does not have any really prominent challengers, but this allows him to sort of get some attention, and some would argue maybe try to position himself to run for higher office once he's done being governor.
And Guy, Governor Newsom is up for re-election in the fall. He's running against a Republican state senator, Brian Daly, who is, by the way, anti-abortion. And so while Newsom's not likely to lose, he might get some mileage out of this issue.
Right, and as the top Democrat on the ticket, I think he bears a responsibility for turnout, right? He bears a responsibility to get the base out for this election, particularly in places where it's needed for the party, in those very competitive congressional districts. I think you combine the money Newsom is going to spend on the air, touting his abortion policies, combined with a possible constitutional amendment that he's pursuing to actually put this question on the ballot, I think is driven at getting the base out in November.
And of course, Seema, we have some pretty congressional seats that are really up for grabs in purple districts, 3 to 5, depending on how you count them. What impact do you see this abortion issue having in those races?
Well, a number of these districts have sort of a large number of college-educated women, and Democrats are really counting on this issue motivating these women. Some who might not be registered Democratic voters, but who might be moderates or maybe even Republicans. One of those is Michelle Steele's district in Orange County, which has more than, I think, 40% of the voters are college-educated women. So Republicans are widely expected to take control of Congress this year. The question is, what's the margin? And we have 3 incredibly competitive congressional races in California, several others that are might be in play. So this is going to determine how much power that the Republican Party holds in Congress. And Democrats are looking back to like 1992, the year of the woman. That was the year of the Clarence Thomas hearings, where Anita Hill was just really grilled, and that was major news. And then that was also the year of another Supreme Court ruling, which upheld Roe, but it did sort of chip back at abortion rights. And this really motivated women to volunteer, to donate, to vote. And so Democrats are hoping to see some sort of that effect this year. The question is, will it be enough in these districts? And I mean, there's still like a couple weeks to go before election day.
Exactly, the ballots are out. Guy, do you see any downside for Democrats running in congressional districts in places like the Central Valley or Orange County?
Yeah, no, I think it's a way to get conversation away from issues Democrats may not want to be talking about
inflation
right now. Inflation, take public safety. That's an issue that's dominated the conversation around the attorney general race. You have to think incumbent Rob Bonta, facing a statewide electorate for the first time, would love nothing more than to pivot and talk about abortion. That, of course, is a lot easier if he's able to avoid a general election contest with Anne Marie Schubert, the Sacramento County DA, running as an independent who is pro-choice.
And Seema, down in LA, we have a hot mayor's race. Eric Garcetti trying to get out of town to become the ambassador to India. That may or may not happen, but what's going on with that mayor's race?
Well, so Joe Boscaino, who's a member of the city council who represents the San Pedro area, he just dropped out of the race. He was a police officer, well known in his community, but not as well known citywide. He just dropped out of the race and backed businessman Rick Caruso, and it's really turned into a two-person race. Rick Caruso and Karen Bass, the congresswoman, and Caruso has just been putting us so much money. I mean, he's obviously very wealthy. He's been putting so much money. You can't turn on the TV here in Southern California without seeing one of his ads. But abortion is also, Roe is also playing in this race, because while Caruso is now a Democrat, he used to be a Republican. He gave a lot of money to Republican elected officials and politicians who don't support access to abortion. And so Democrats in the city are really trying to hammer that issue.
And so to what extent is crime playing out down there? We know that your DA is facing a potential recall himself, as ours is, George Gascon. Is that playing out there? You mentioned the former law enforcement official dropped out of the race.
Right, and crime is homelessness. Those are certainly issues that are playing out in the city, and that's sort of the basis of Rick Caruso's whole argument for why he believes he should lead the city next. That he's a businessman, but he's also worked on reforming police. He worked on the problems at USC that he's sort of had proven results. But Karen Bass and other people, first of all, they point to the fact that he's been a Democrat for a very small amount of time, and this is an overwhelmingly Democratic city, and also they question whether his business style, et cetera, whether that's the right way to lead the city. And Karen Bass obviously has a ton of experience as a community organizer.
She's and very well known and has picked up a lot of endorsements. Guy, about a minute left. Ballots have landed here in the Bay Area and everywhere throughout the state. There's some changes in voting in the Bay Area. Can you tell us quickly what some of those are? Yeah, so Alameda, Marin, Sonoma, they're their latest counties to say goodbye to your neighborhood polling place. So they're not going to assign you a polling place to go on Election Day. This is the Voters' Choice Act model where they open larger voting locations, but fewer of them. And there is a growing body of research that says fewer voting locations are not good if you want to close the turnout disparity between white voters and Latino and black voters. But that's where the state is going, right? I mean, the Bay Area is just the latest to adopt that system. Certainly, and there's counties all the way down to San Diego that are also introducing that system this June. All right, Gar Marzorati and Seema Mehta in Los Angeles, thank you both very much. And don't forget, check out KQED's voter guide. It's at kqed.org/voter guide. And you can find it there and get all your voter and election questions answered. What do you do with home goods, fabrics, paper, and other items that you no longer need but hate to throw away because they still have plenty of life left in them? Well, one lovely option is to donate them to the East Bay Depot for Creative Reuse in Oakland, which is this week's look at something beautiful. The depot was started by two teachers in 1977 and to this day fulfills its mission of keeping solid waste out of landfills by turning cast-offs into a treasure trove of materials for arts, crafts, and other projects. And that's the end of our show for tonight. You can find KQED Newsroom online or on Twitter, or email us at knr@kqed.org. And you can reach me if you'd like on social media at Scott Schaefer. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you right back here next week on Friday night. Have a great weekend.